I never expected that a plumbing disaster would change my life, but that's exactly what happened when my neighbor's shower basically exploded. It was one of those small, domestic catastrophes that ripple outward, and in my case, the ripples washed away years of quiet, solitary routine and brought something entirely new to my door. Literally. My life, up until that point, was a carefully curated collection of predictable moments. My name is Miles. I work from home as a web developer, a job that suits my temperament perfectly. I like order. I like knowing what the day holds before my feet even hit the floor in the morning. My apartment was my sanctuary, a small one-bedroom on the third floor of an old brick building with charming, if slightly inconvenient, eccentricities. The steam heat hissed and clanked in the winter, and the floors creaked with the ghosts of 100 past tenants. It was a life built for one, comfortable and insulated. Loneliness was a familiar hum in the background, like the buzz of the refrigerator. I wasn't unhappy, not really. I was just settled. My social interactions were mostly digital, brief exchanges with clients over email or the occasional polite nod to a neighbor in the hallway. And that's how I knew Caleb. Caleb lived in 3B, the apartment right next to mine. Our bedrooms shared a wall that was apparently not as thick as one might hope. I didn't know his name at first. I just knew him by the sounds of his life. The solid, rhythmic thud of weights hitting the floor in the early morning. The low rumble of a country music station in the evenings. The sharp, clean scent of sawdust that sometimes clung to him when we passed in the hall. He was a construction worker, and he looked the part. Tall, broad-shouldered, with arms that showed the clear definition of manual labor. He had dark, unruly hair that he was always pushing out of his eyes and a dusting of stubble that seemed to be his default state. He moved with a kind of grounded confidence that I, with my life spent in front of a screen, found both intimidating and deeply fascinating. To me, he was a collection of hypermasculine signifiers, a walking, breathing archetype of a guy who would have no interest in someone like me. He was attractive in an obvious, undeniable way, like a landmark you can't help but notice. But he was also, in my mind, from a completely different world. He was the sun-drenched outdoors. I was the soft glow of a computer monitor. So, I kept my distance, cataloging these small details from afar, filing him away under unattainable. That Tuesday started like any other. I was deep in code, troubleshooting a particularly nasty bug for a client. The only sounds in my apartment the click-clack of my keyboard and the gentle hum of my server. Then, through the wall, I heard a loud, percussive bang, like a bookshelf collapsing. It was followed by a string of curses and the distinct, alarming sound of rushing water. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keys. I wasn't the type to get involved. My default setting was to mind my own business, to assume it had nothing to do with me. But the sound of the water was relentless, a miniature waterfall roaring to life next door. Before I could fully retreat back into my bubble of non-involvement, there was a frantic, heavy pounding on my front door. I took a breath, my heart kicking up a notch. This was an unscheduled event, a deviation from the norm. I opened the door to find Caleb standing there, looking anything but the confident, put-together man I was used to seeing. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, his t-shirt was soaked through, and water dripped from the hem of his jeans, forming a small puddle on my welcome mat. He looked flustered, stressed, and unbelievably handsome, even in his state of domestic crisis. "Hey, sorry to bother you, man," he said, his voice a little breathless. He gestured helplessly back toward his own apartment. "My shower. I think a pipe burst or something. It's a mess. The water's off now, but I'm soaked and covered in, well, rust and who knows what else." He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking deeply exasperated. "Look, this is a really weird question, but is there any chance I could use your shower? The landlord's not answering, and I can't exactly go to work like this tomorrow." My brain short-circuited for a second. Of all the things I might have imagined Caleb saying to me, this was not on the list. All my carefully constructed barriers and assumptions felt flimsy in the face of this very real, very wet problem. A simple no would have been impossibly rude. A yes felt significant. It was inviting this person, this landmark from another world, into my sanctuary. "Oh, wow. Yeah, of course," I heard myself say, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. "Come on in. It's just down the hall." He gave me a look of immense relief, a small, genuine smile breaking through his stress. Thank you. Seriously, you're a lifesaver, Miles. He knew my name. I was momentarily stunned by that small fact. I just nodded and stepped back, holding the door open for him. He stepped inside, bringing with him the smell of damp plaster and rain-soaked earth. The quiet, predictable hum of my life had just been interrupted, and I had a feeling things were about to get a lot more complicated. I pointed him toward the bathroom, handed him a set of clean towels, the good ones I reserved for no one, really, and then retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. My apartment felt different with him in it. His presence was a tangible thing, filling the space in a way my own never did. I could hear the shower turn on, the steady spray of water a new rhythm in my home. What does one do when a half-naked neighbor is washing off catastrophe grime in their bathroom? My hands felt useless. I decided to make coffee. It seemed like a normal, neighborly thing to do. The act of scooping grounds and filling the pot was grounding, a small piece of routine in a decidedly unroutine situation. The rich, dark aroma of brewing coffee began to fill the kitchen, a comforting scent that battled with the lingering strangeness of the moment. When Caleb emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, he was wearing a fresh t-shirt and jeans he'd retrieved from his apartment, his hair damp and curling at the edges. A clean towel was draped over his shoulders. He looked less like a man in crisis and more like the person I saw in the hallways, only softer around the edges, his usual confidence tempered by gratitude. "That was amazing," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I feel human again." "Thanks." Really, his eyes met mine, and he held the gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. It was the first time we'd ever really looked at each other. I saw that his eyes weren't just brown, but a warm hazel, flecked with green. "Coffee?" I asked, gesturing toward the pot. My voice was steadier than I felt. "I would love some," he said, pulling out a chair at my small kitchen table. He sat down as if he belonged there, and the sight of him, this large, solid man at my tiny table, was both jarring and strangely right. I poured 2 mugs and sat down across from him. For a moment, we just sat in silence, the steam from our coffee rising between us. It wasn't awkward, not exactly. It was expectant, a blank page waiting for the first word. He was the one who broke the silence. "What a nightmare," he sighed, shaking his head. "I swear this building. It's one thing after another. My dad's a plumber, you know. He'd have a field day with the shoddy work in this place. I called my landlord, and of course, it went straight to voicemail. Probably won't hear back for a week." He spoke with a kind of weary frustration that I found surprisingly endearing. This wasn't the stoic, unflappable man I had imagined. This was just a guy, stressed out about his apartment, annoyed with his landlord. It was humanizing. The pedestal I'd put him on began to crumble, replaced by something much more real and approachable. "He's not the best," I agreed. "My kitchen sink leaked for 3 weeks before he sent someone." Caleb laughed, a genuine, warm sound that made my chest feel tight. "Sounds about right. I grew up in a house my dad basically built himself. Everything worked. You turned a faucet, water came out. You flushed a toilet, it flushed. Simple stuff." I missed that he looked around my small kitchen, his gaze thoughtful. "It's weird living in a place that doesn't quite feel like your own, you know." That one question, disarmed me completely. It was an invitation, an assumption of shared experience. And I didn't know. I knew exactly what he meant. "Yeah," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I do." We talked for almost an hour. He told me about his family, about his job, which he described as glorified adult Lego, but with more swearing. I told him about my web development work, and to my surprise, he was genuinely interested. He asked smart questions, not just the polite, glazed-over nods I usually got when I tried to explain what I do. He seemed to see the structure and creativity in it, the same way he saw it in the buildings he worked on. It was the easiest conversation I'd had with a stranger in years. The distance between us, which had once felt like a vast canyon, was shrinking with every word. We weren't a construction worker and a web developer anymore. We were just Miles and Caleb, 2 guys in their late 20s, drinking coffee on a Tuesday night because of a burst pipe. When he finally stood up to leave, the empty mug sitting on the table between us, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. It was charged with a new kind of awareness. "Well," he said, walking toward the door, "I should let you get back to your night. But seriously, Miles, Thank you. For the shower, the coffee, everything. He paused at the doorway, turning back to face me. He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. The contact was brief, just a friendly squeeze, but it sent a jolt straight through me. It was a simple, platonic gesture of thanks. I knew that, but my body didn't. My body registered the heat of his palm, the slight pressure of his fingers, and translated it into a language of its own. Anytime I managed to say, my throat suddenly dry. He gave me one last small smile, and then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood there for a long moment, my shoulders still tingling where he had touched it. The apartment was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It was a silence filled with the echo of his voice, the memory of his laugh, and the ghost of his touch. My predictable, orderly world had been breached, and a part of me, a part one hadn't realized was so dormant, was hoping it would never be the same again. The next day, the landlord did not, in fact, call Caleb back. This was confirmed via a text message that appeared on my phone around 5 in the evening. Hey, it's Caleb. Still no word from the powers that be. Any chance I could impose on your kindness and your shower again tonight? We'll bring pizza as a thank you. My heart did a ridiculous little flip-flop. I told myself it was just about the pizza. I typed back, of course. And you don't have to bring pizza. His reply came instantly. Too late. Already ordered. Pepperoni and mushroom okay. It was my favorite. A coincidence, surely. But hope is a stubborn, irrational thing. It finds patterns in the chaos and calls them fate. That evening was even easier than the last. We ate pizza sitting on my living room floor because my kitchen table was too small to comfortably hold the box. He went to shower, and when he came out, he lingered again. We ended up watching some mindless action movie on TV, offering sarcastic commentary. It felt domestic, comfortable, dangerously so. This became our new routine. Each evening, Caleb would text, and I would say yes. His plumbing situation stretched from an emergency into a long-running saga. The landlord finally sent a guy who looked at the damage, shook his head, and said he'd need to order parts. It would be days, maybe a week. Caleb's frustration was my secret thrill. Each day was another chance to bridge that gap between us, to turn the strange circumstance into something real. The turning point came on Friday. It had been a long week for both of us. My client had moved up a deadline, and I'd been staring at code for 10 hours straight. Caleb had been working a tough job outdoors in the unseasonable late autumn chill. He arrived at my door looking utterly spent. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he moved with a weary stiffness that hadn't been there before. Rough day? I asked, stepping aside to let him in. He let out a long, slow sigh. You have no idea. We were pouring concrete in the wind. I'm cold all the way to my bones, he rubbed at the back of his neck. A hot shower is about the only thing I've been looking forward to all day. Well, you know where it is, I said, trying to keep my tone light. He gave me a grateful look and disappeared down the hall. I started tidying up the living room, trying to distract myself from the sound of the water running, from the knowledge that he was in my bathroom, in my shower, just a few feet away. The intimacy of our strange arrangement was beginning to feel less like a fluke and more like a sustained, deliberate thing. A few minutes later, his voice called out from the bathroom, muffled by the door and the sound of the water. Miles? Hey, Miles, can you come in here for a sec? My stomach twisted into a knot. Is everything okay? I called back, walking toward the door. Yeah, it's just, can you come in? It's a weird favor. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, most of them absurd. I took a breath and pushed the door open. The small room was filled with a thick, white cloud of steam, smelling of soap and damp heat. The shower curtain, a simple, plain white one, was mostly drawn, but I could see his silhouette through it, tall and broad. What's up? I asked, my voice sounding tight in the humid air. The curtain slid back a few inches. He peered out, his face flushed from the heat, water droplets clinging to his eyelashes and tracing paths down his temples. He was holding the bar of soap out toward me. This is going to sound ridiculous, he said, his voice low and a little embarrassed. But my back is killing me. I pulled something today, and I literally can't reach the middle of it to wash it. Could you? He trailed off, leaving the request hanging in the steamy air between us. Time seemed to slow down. It was such a simple, practical request, an act of mundane assistance, but it felt monumental. It was a request for a level of intimacy that went far beyond sharing coffee or watching a movie. It was a request for care, for touch. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet, steamy room. Yeah? Sure, I said, the words feeling inadequate. I stepped closer, my shoes squeaking slightly on the damp floor tiles. I took the bar of soap from his hand. His fingers brushed against mine, warm and wet. The contact was electric, a tiny spark that lit up my entire nervous system. He turned his back to me, his shoulders tensing for a moment before they relaxed. "Thanks," he murmured. I stood there for a second, holding the soap, my mind a complete blank. This was happening. Caleb was standing in my shower, waiting for me to wash his back. I worked the soap between my hands, creating a lather. The scent was clean and simple, the soap I used every day, but in this context, it felt charged with meaning. I reached forward, my hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before making contact with his skin. His back was a wide, solid expanse of muscle, warm and slick with water. The heat of him was immediate, visceral. I started to move my hands in slow, steady circles, soaping the space between his shoulder blades that he couldn't reach. The room was silent except for the drumming of the water and the soft, slick sound of my hands moving over his skin. I focused on the task, on the texture of the soap and the solid feel of the muscle beneath his skin. I was hyper-aware of everything. The way the steam curled around us, the vulnerability in the line of his neck, the sheer, undeniable reality of his physical presence. I expected him to stand perfectly still, rigid with the awkwardness of the situation. But he didn't. As I continued to wash his back, he let out a quiet sigh, a sound of pure relief, and he leaned back into my touch. It was a subtle movement, a shift of only an inch or two, but it changed everything. It wasn't a retreat, not a flinch away from the strange intimacy of the moment. It was a surrender. He wasn't just tolerating my touch, he was accepting it, welcoming it. The professional distance of a favor dissolved into something deeply personal. He didn't step back, he closed the little remaining space between us. In that moment, he wasn't just a neighbor. He wasn't just a guy whose shower had exploded. He was Caleb, and I was Miles, and we were standing in a small, steam-filled room, connected by a simple act of care that felt more profound than any conversation we'd ever had. I kept my touch gentle, methodical, my own breathing lost in the humid air. I didn't know how long I was there, my hands moving over his back, but when I finished, I rinsed the soap from my hands and stepped away without a word. He didn't turn around. He just said, his voice thick, "Thanks, Miles." "No problem," I whispered to the closed curtain, and I backed out of the bathroom, shutting the door quietly behind me. I leaned against the cool wall in the hallway, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. The air outside the bathroom felt cold on my flushed skin. Something had just shifted, fundamentally and irrevocably. A line had been crossed, not with words, but with warm water and a bar of soap. And I had absolutely no idea what it meant. The aftermath was defined by a deafening silence. The easy camaraderie we had built over pizza and bad movies evaporated overnight, replaced by a thick, unspoken tension. When Caleb came out of the bathroom that night, he was quiet, his eyes refusing to meet mine. He grabbed his things, mumbled a "see you later," and was gone before I could formulate a response. The apartment felt cavernously empty without him. The next day, Saturday, I saw him in the hallway as I was leaving to get groceries. Our eyes met for a brief, panicked second. He gave a tight, almost pained-looking nod and quickly looked away, fumbling with his keys as he unlocked his door. He didn't stop to talk. He didn't smile. The warm, open man from my kitchen had been replaced by a stranger who seemed determined to avoid me. My mind, of course, went into overdrive. I had misread everything. The backwashing, his leaning into my touch, it was nothing. It was just a tired guy grateful for some help. I had invented the intimacy, projected my own hopes onto a simple, physical act. I was a creep who had made him uncomfortable. The thought was mortifying, a hot flush of shame that stayed with me all day. I spent the entire weekend in a state of anxious paralysis, replaying the scene in the bathroom 1,000 times. Each time, I tried to see it from a different angle. The analytical part of my brain, the part that debugs code, tried to break it down into logical components. The request, the steam, the touch, the sigh, the lean. But human interaction isn't code. There are no clear variables, no predictable outputs. It's all nuance and emotion and the terrifying possibility of getting it completely wrong. The hope that had been blooming in my chest all week withered. I had been so stupid. Of course, a guy like Caleb wasn't interested in me. I had let a plumbing emergency and a few friendly conversations trick me into believing in a fantasy. He was just being nice, and I had turned it into something weird. Now he was avoiding me, probably counting the minutes until his shower was fixed so he'd never have to speak to me again. I became a detective of silence. I listened for the sounds through the wall, trying to decipher his movements. Was that his front door? Was he leaving? Coming home? The absence of a text message each evening was a confirmation of my fears. Saturday night passed with no communication. Then Sunday. The silence was an answer in itself, and it was telling me everything I didn't want to hear. By Sunday night, I had resigned myself to the new reality. We would go back to being strangers who shared a wall. We would exchange polite, distant nods in the hallway. The brief, warm interlude of the past week would become a strange memory, a story I would never tell anyone. The thought left a hollow ache in my chest. I had been given a glimpse of something wonderful, a connection I hadn't realized how much I craved, only to have it snatched away. And it was my fault. I had pushed too far, read too much into it, and broken the fragile spell. My apartment felt lonely again, but it was a different kind of loneliness now. Before, it had been a passive, background hum. Now, it was an active, painful presence. It was the silence where his laugh used to be. It was the empty chair at my kitchen table. It was the knowledge that he was just on the other side of the wall, and yet he was a million miles away. I went to bed that night feeling foolish and profoundly alone, convinced that I had ruined my one chance at something more. On Monday evening, just as I was resigning myself to another quiet night of work and solitude, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't the frantic pounding of the week before, but a soft, hesitant rap. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew it was him. I considered not answering, letting him think I wasn't home. It would be easier, less painful. But my feet carried me to the door against my better judgment. I opened it to find Caleb standing there. He was holding one of my neatly folded towels. He looked nervous, his eyes darting from my face to the floor and back again. He wasn't wearing his usual confident armor. He just looked like a guy who had something difficult to say. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "My shower's fixed. They finished up this afternoon." "Oh," I said, my own voice flat. "That's good." I reached for the towel, my fingers brushing his. The familiar spark was there, but this time it was laced with anxiety. He didn't let go of the towel right away. I wanted to bring this back," he said, his gaze finally settling on mine. "And to thank you again. For everything." "It was nothing," I said, the words automatic. I just wanted the conversation to be over, to retreat back into my apartment where I could nurse my bruised ego in peace. "No, it wasn't nothing," he said, and his voice was firm now, insistent. "Miles, can I come in for a minute?" This was it. The official friendzone speech. The let's just pretend that weird shower thing never happened conversation. Every self-protective instinct screamed at me to say no, but I heard myself say, "Sure." He stepped inside, and I closed the door behind him. He didn't move toward the kitchen or the living room, but stood awkwardly in the small entryway, still holding the towel like a shield. The tension in the air was so thick I could practically taste it. "Look," he started, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry I've been weird. The last couple of days. Avoiding you." "It's fine," I said quickly. "You don't have to." "No, let me just say this," he interrupted, his voice earnest. "I'm not good at this stuff. At talking. About feelings, or whatever. I'm good at building things, at fixing things. This is not my area of expertise." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I was coming to recognize as his tell for nervousness. He looked at me, his hazel eyes full of an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "The other night in the shower. It wasn't nothing to me. And when you were helping me, I kind of freaked out afterward. Not because of you. Because of me." I just stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words. This was not the speech I had been steeling myself for. "I've noticed you for months, Miles," he confessed, his voice dropping even lower. "In the hall, coming and going. I thought you were. I don't know. Really cute. And quiet. I wanted to talk to you, but I had no idea what to say. Hey, I'm your neighbor who you hear dropping weights at 6 in the morning. Want to get a coffee? It felt stupid. He let out a short, humorless laugh. And then my shower exploded. And it felt like some kind of sign. A crazy, stupid opportunity. And it was great. Talking to you, eating pizza with you, it was better than I thought it would be. He finally set the towel down on the small table by the door. But then, Friday night, that moment, it just felt really real. And it scared the hell out of me. Because I realized I really, really liked you. And I had no idea if you felt the same way. And I figured I had to have misread it, that I'd made you uncomfortable. So I just panicked. The world tilted on its axis. All my anxieties, all my carefully constructed narratives of rejection and misinterpretation, they all just crumbled into dust. He wasn't avoiding me because he was repulsed. He was avoiding me because he was scared. He felt the same way. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. You panicked? I said, a wide smile spreading across my face. Caleb, I've spent the last 48 hours convinced I was the world's biggest creep who had completely misread the situation and that you were never going to speak to me again. A look of utter astonishment dawned on his face. You what? You thought? He shook his head, and then he started to laugh, too. A real, genuine laugh of relief that filled the small space. So we've both just been hiding in our apartments, being idiots. Basically, yes, I confirmed, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. The laughter subsided, and we were left looking at each other, the tension gone, replaced by a shared, giddy understanding. He took a step closer, closing the distance between us. So, he said, his voice soft again. Just so I'm perfectly clear this time. You're not creeped out. Not even a little, I said, my voice barely a whisper. And you, maybe, like me back? He asked, his gaze searching mine. I didn't need words for this part. I closed the final gap between us and pressed my lips against his. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a kiss full of all the anxiety and hope and relief of the past week. It was the end of the silence and the beginning of everything else. He responded immediately, his hands coming up to cup my face, his kiss firm and sure and everything I had secretly hoped it would be. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, resting our foreheads against each other. Okay, he breathed out, a slow smile spreading across his lips. Good. I'm glad we cleared that up. Me too, I said, smiling back at him. Me too. In the weeks that followed, my quiet, orderly world was joyfully dismantled and rebuilt into something new, something shared. Our first official date was at a small Italian restaurant he loved, a place with checkered tablecloths and ridiculously good garlic bread. He told me stories about his childhood, and I found myself laughing more than I had in years. The following weekend, I introduced him to my world, taking him to a tiny independent movie theater to see an obscure foreign film. He complained good-naturedly about the subtitles, but held my hand the entire time, his thumb stroking gentle circles over my knuckles. Our lives began to merge in small, meaningful ways. He fixed the perpetually squeaky hinge on my closet door without me even having to ask. I helped him navigate the labyrinthine world of online shopping to find a new rug for his living room. We cooked together in my tiny kitchen, bumping elbows and hips in a comfortable dance, discovering that his skills with a hammer and nails did not, in fact, translate to chopping an onion without crying. Our apartments were no longer separate territories connected by a thin wall. They were two parts of a shared home. The quiet hum of loneliness that had been the background music of my life was replaced by a new soundtrack. The sound of his key in my door, the low rumble of his voice asking about my day, the shared silence of two people reading on the same couch. The fear and anxiety that had characterized our beginning melted away, leaving behind a foundation of trust and a deep, comforting affection. I moved from a life of passive observation to one of active, joyful participation, and it was the most natural thing in the world. A few months later, on a lazy Sunday afternoon, we were lying on my couch, the gray light of a rainy day filtering through the window. Caleb was half asleep, his head resting on my chest, his heavy arm draped over my waist. The rhythm of his breathing was a slow, steady comfort. Outside, The rain drummed against the glass, a soothing, gentle percussion. He stirred, nuzzling his face into my shirt. "You know," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep, "my new shower is great. Perfect water pressure, no weird noises." He paused, a smile in his voice. "But I gotta say, I kind of miss the old one." I laughed, tightening my arm around him. The callback to our chaotic beginning was perfect. That burst pipe, that moment of crisis, had been the catalyst for everything that followed. It had been the unexpected jolt that knocked both of our carefully ordered lives off their solitary tracks and set them on a path toward each other. It's funny how life works, isn't it? You spend so much time building walls, curating a safe and predictable existence, believing you know the shape of your own life. And then one day, a neighbor's plumbing explodes, and they knock on your door, soaked and stressed, asking for a simple favor. And in opening that door, you open yourself up to a world of possibilities you never knew existed. You learn that vulnerability isn't a weakness, and that the most profound connections can be forged in the most mundane of disasters, built on a foundation of borrowed towels, shared pizza, and the courage to wash away the silence and say what you truly feel.